Along West Africa's Atlantic coastline, 6 ports stand like chess pieces positioned for the ultimate economic showdown, battling for control over the economic lifelines of entire landlocked nations, each striving for the crown as West Africa's supreme maritime gateway. Meet the natural giant, Côte d'Ivoire's port of Abidjan. With its massive deep draft, Abidjan can welcome colossal container ships that others can only watch sail past. And the port is planning to quadruple its capacity, positioning itself as West Africa's dominant maritime hub. Then there's the heavyweight contender, Lagos in Nigeria. With over 200 million potential customers right in your backyard, Lagos should be absolutely unstoppable. Chinese investors certainly think so, pouring billions into the game-changer, Lekki Deep Sea Port. But Lagos has a fatal flaw lurking beneath all that potential. Ghana's port of Tema tries to play a different game entirely. Positioned at the perfect crossroads with the shortest routes to landlocked countries, Tema wants to operate as the express lane to Africa's interior, turning geography into pure competitive advantage. Speaking of geography, let's meet Senegal's port of Dakar. Its advantage can't be replicated. Location, location, location. Sitting at Africa's westernmost tip, Dakar becomes the first port of call for ships crossing the Atlantic. Now, we meet the ultimate underdog, Benin's port of Cotonou. Sure, it ranks as the least competitive among these West African powerhouses, but here's what the rankings miss. Cotonou controls the biggest gateway to landlocked Niger, handling a strong 80% of that nation's trade, proving that sometimes being indispensable matters more than being impressive. Finally, enter the dark horse that nobody saw coming and the current champion by volume, Togo's port of Lomé. While others were making noise, Lomé quietly became the only sub-Saharan African port to crack the global top 100 rankings. It now handles more containers than any other West African port and reaches depths of more than 16 meters, leaving competitors drowning in envy. In this episode, we dive deep into the unprecedented maritime power struggle transforming West Africa's coastline, exploring how global shipping titans are pouring billions into these harbors, why local governments are betting their economic futures on these mega projects, and what new dynamics put regional coalitions against external forces. Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger are massive countries with zero access to the ocean. Every single item these nations import or export must flow through one of these coastal ports, which means every delay, every inefficiency, and every extra dollar in shipping costs hits them like no one can believe. Let's turn to the numbers to understand the story better. Mali, the 8th largest country in Africa, depends on Senegal and Abidjan for a significant part of its trade. The Dakar-Bamako corridor holds around 60% of it, and the Abidjan corridor about 20%. Burkina Faso relies on Lomé for more than 70% of its transit goods, and Niger sends 80% of its overseas trade through Cotonou, all through narrow corridors that literally determines the country's economic fate. Over 90% of African trade travels by sea, giving these ports incredible value, and this value is sustained by 3 massive global forces. First, global trade exploded. While maritime trade grew steadily worldwide, West Africa experienced an unprecedented growth. Container traffic jumped 10% annually from 2002 to 2012. The region's appetite for containers is voracious. Every 1% increase in economic growth creates a 2% surge in container demand. Second, shipping giants arrived with their massive vessels. MSC, the world's largest container shipping company, has invested in Lomé more than any other port in the region, over $500 million in various port materials to use it as its strategic main hub. Third, private money started flowing like a broken dam. Formerly decrepit state-run harbors, plagued by costs 50% higher than global standards, suddenly became magnets for billion-dollar investments. And the transformation was instant and dramatic. More volume, more throughput, and more revenue. West Africa's ports erupted into an all-out maritime arms race. Port of Abidjan fired the opening shot in November 2022, unleashing its second container terminal with a 16-meter draft and a 630-meter dock, watching container traffic explode from 800,000 to 1.6 million in just 2 years. Togo's port of Lomé struck back harder, in March 2023, expanding its terminal with a colossal 1,050-meter dock and a 16.6-meter depth, proving it could handle ultra-large vessels while boosting capacity to 2.5 million containers. Ghana's port of Tema refused to be outgunned, unleashing 15 state-of-the-art cranes in July of the same year that catapulted its capacity from 2.5 to 3.7 million containers. The Port of Cotonou embarked on an ambitious modernization and expansion plan, while the Port of Dakar also improved its operations. All this culminated in the historic month of April of this year. The MSC Diletta is one of the largest container ships in the world. Its size represents the cutting edge of ultra-large container vessel design, able to carry massive volumes of cargo in a single voyage. So, on April 2025, for the first time, the giant 24,000 container ship docked at 3 ports in the region: Tema in Ghana, Lomé in Togo, and Abidjan in Côte d'Ivoire. West African ports officially graduated into global maritime prominence by handling some of the biggest and most efficient ships afloat. This transformation impacts trade dynamics and economic growth prospects for the entire West African region. Just 2 months after this historic milestone, Nigeria reacted and dropped the ultimate bombshell. Aliko Dangote, Africa's richest man, submitted official paperwork to build the Olokola deep-sea port in Ogun State. This new port promises to be Nigeria's largest and deepest seaport, with a dock length of approximately 1.5 kilometers and a 2.5 million container capacity. In the landscape of West Africa's ports, every upgrade now is a concrete step to seize the lion's share of the economic boost from the region. And it's not just about size anymore. Ports deploy artificial intelligence, automated cranes, and digital processing systems that can handle paperwork at lightning speed. The efficiency gains are staggering. Some ports have reduced vessel waiting times drastically. But the status quo is always meant to be disturbed, especially in business. For decades, most ports enjoyed what experts call captive hinterlands. That's the inland regions whose trade had to flow through a particular port due to limitations in transport options, higher costs, and inefficiencies in moving cargo long distances. Cargo naturally flowed to the nearest port like water flowing downhill. But containers shattered those old rules. It became much easier, cheaper, and faster to route cargo over longer inland distances from a wider selection of ports. Suddenly, landlocked countries had choices. Multiple ports could compete for the same cargo. So now ports are no longer content with local dominance. They now want regional supremacy. Shipping lines ultimately decide which ports becomes regional hubs, based purely on efficiency, capacity, and strategic location, not governments. Container traffic is the first prize, the lifeblood flowing through port steel arteries. Ships carrying thousands of containers must choose where to stop, and that choice translates directly into revenue and jobs. Ports compete to prove they can move cargo faster, cheaper, and more efficiently than their rivals. But the second prize is even more valuable, the transshipment hub status. Think of it as becoming the central station of the region. Massive ships arrive from Asia, unload their cargo, and smaller vessels redistribute it across the entire region. The port that wins this status doesn't just serve its own country, it controls trade for half a continent. And currently, the port of Lomé in Togo is the leading West African transshipment hub. It is supported by emerging significant hubs at Lekki, Abidjan, and Tema. Speed kills the competition, literally. Ports measure everything obsessively: how fast ships reach the docks, how quickly cranes load containers, and how long cargo sits in storage yards. Lomé moves over 30 containers per hour at peak efficiency, matching the best Mediterranean ports, while some rivals take days just to clear customs. But just when you think you understand the rules, the real power players step onto the field. Meet the puppet masters: Mediterranean Shipping Company, Maersk, and CMA CGM. These shipping companies are empire builders who decide which ports live and which port die. MSC's African conquest reads like a corporate thriller. As the world's largest container shipping company, MSC doesn't just use ports, it reshapes entire regions for the selected ones. When they acquired Bolloré Africa Logistics in December 2022, they bought control over West African trade routes, and MSC Masterstroke was making Lomé their exclusive West African hub. Through strategic investments, they've transformed Lomé from a regional player into a continental powerhouse. Maersk plays a different game, focusing on total supply chain control through their terminal arm, which operates across Abidjan, Tema, and Lagos. So when the company moves, entire trade patterns shift like weather systems. These three shipping giants now control approximately 80% of West African container traffic. This can hardly be called competition anymore, it's more like consolidation. And with this consolidation comes the kind of power that set prices with no alternative possible, which can challenge some countries' sovereignty by affecting their ability to govern trade and infrastructure policies fully. This side is covered in two previous episodes, Sudan and Djibouti. But for all the growth and competition, each port has their own Achilles heel. For Abidjan, it's the Vridi Canal. This single waterway controls access to the port, creating a bottleneck that limits growth. It was so significant that authorities invested more than $200 million in a major modernization project, which alleviated the choke point. Lagos is like a heavyweight boxer past his prime, massive but struggling. As West Africa's largest port by scale, it handles over 80% of Nigeria's imports, processing nearly 1.6 million containers annually. The numbers look impressive until you read the fine print. The port of Lagos suffers from chronic congestions that are legendary. Cargo sits for an average of 23 days compared to 9 in Lomé and 15 in Tema and Cotonou. Ships' queue racks up charges that cost Nigeria's economy an estimated $5 million annually. Tema in Ghana enjoys geographic advantages, but recent studies shows that operations are plagued by persistent inefficiencies and infrastructure bottlenecks. Worse, its expansion project has been marred by political interference and stakeholder conflicts. Contract disputes created negative publicity, leading to declining vessel visits just when Tema needs momentum most. And then there's Lomé, with its geographic lottery win. The port's rise reads like a business school case study. Consistent efficiency scores, ultra-modern facilities, and the political stability that investors crave. With MSC's exclusive partnership, the Port of Lomé has grown steadily for just over a decade. But behind every efficiency statistic, we forget the human stories and how it affects us. In Abidjan and Lagos terminals, truck drivers sit for hours in traffic jams stretching for kilometers, a heavy economic burden for small businesses trying to compete globally. The ultimate question facing West Africa's maritime revolution is whether this unprecedented port expansion will deliver the promised economic transformation or create a costly collection of underutilized facilities, draining public coffers for decades to come. To understand this risk, we need to grasp the concept of infrastructure white elephants. Massive, expensive projects that consume enormous resources during construction but fail to generate sufficient economic activity to justify their cost once operational. It's already happening in East Africa. The Bagamoyo Megaport project in Tanzania stalled after billions in commitments because realistic demand projections couldn't support the ambitious capacity targets, leaving behind a tale of what happens when infrastructure dreams collide with market realities. With multiple ports simultaneously pursuing aggressive expansion without sufficient regional coordination, these ports are preparing to handle over 10 million additional containers annually, in a market where current throughput struggles to efficiently use existing facilities. The warning signs of potential overcapacity are already emerging across the region. At Lekki Deep Sea Port, despite its world-class equipment and impressive meter depth, the port has operated at a fraction of its designed capacity, proving the critical gap between built infrastructure and actual cargo throughput. Building capacity is relatively straightforward compared to attracting and sustaining the cargo volume needed to make that capacity profitable. Regional coordination represents the missing piece in this maritime puzzle. Organizations like ECOWAS and the Port Management Association of West and Central Africa promote greater collaboration, but the implementation across countries and ports is uneven. Currently, each country pursues port expansion as a national priority without sufficient consideration of regional cargo flows and capacity utilization across the broader West African market. This approach means one country's successful port expansion directly undermines neighboring facilities, turning regional partners into economic competitors fighting over limited cargo volumes. For West Africa, the challenge is simple: turn these mega projects into engines of growth, or let them fade into billion-dollar lessons of what could have been.